Chapter 11 of Tractate Yevamos goes through some additional general points in the laws of marriage. The first Mishnah says it's legally permissible for a man to marry the relatives of a woman he had violated or seduced, but he is liable if he does these acts to the relatives of his wife. A man is permitted to marry a woman who was violated or seduced by his father or son, but Rabbi Yehuda says it's impermissible if done by his father. The Gemara says this is a biblical permissibility. Rabbinically, there are stringencies by related situations, and a person is rabbinically only allowed to marry the relative of a woman he had violated or seduced after she passed. Sources are brought and discussed. It also lists a lengthy number of popular riddle-like questions from those times of complex relative possibilities and how they're theoretically possible based on various odd marriage combinations. New Mishnah, if a female convert had sons who converted with her, and one of the sons marry and pass, his brothers don't do Yibum or Chalitzah. This would also apply if the son was conceived prior to conversion and born after, while the brother's conception and birth were after they converted. This also applies by a slave woman whose sons were freed with her. The Gemara discusses some related disputes. This is all discussed further along with some additional points. New Mishnah, if there are 5 women whose children all got mixed up with each other and then grew up, marry, and die childless, in regards to Yibum, their 4 brothers can do Chalitzah with 1, and the remaining can do Yibum for each widow. The Gemara says the Chalitzah needs to always be done first to prevent the possibility of a woman needing Yibum marrying a random other man. Furthermore, the specific case of the Mishnah has to show that it's more preferable that one brother does Yibum with all of the widows to give everybody at least a chance of marrying their brother's widow and fulfill the obligation of Yibum. There are several other variations of this case discussed, and this goes further. New Mishnah, if a woman's child got mixed up at birth with her daughter-in-law's child, and they grow up, marry, and die childless, the sons of the daughter-in-law do Chalitzah and do not Yibum with both widows, because it could possibly be their brother's wife, who they can marry, or their father's brother's wife, who they cannot marry. The sons of the older woman can do Chalitzah or Yibum with both, as they could be their brother's wife or brother's son's wife, which are both permissible to them. If the sons whose identities are known die childless, the mixed-up sons of the older woman both do Chalitzah, but not Yibum, as one could be their father's brother's wife, and the daughter-in-law's sons, one does Chalitzah and the other can then do Yibum. If the child of a Kohen got mixed up with the child of her slave woman, both can eat Truma, but they can only get one portion. Neither can impurify themselves from the dead, and neither is allowed to get married to anyone. If they grow up and free each other, they can marry women fit to marry a Kohen, and they cannot touch dead impurity. Although, if they did, they don't get the penalty of lashes. They cannot eat Truma, but if they did, they aren't required to do the full reimbursement, which is plus a 5th. They don't get a portion of Teruma, but they can sell their own Teruma produce and keep the proceeds. They don't receive a portion of consecrated temple items or kudshim, holy offering meats, but they can keep their own. They don't need to give the select animal portions to a Kohen, and their firstborn animals should be left to graze until they develop a blemish, and they have the stringencies of a Kohen and of a Yisrael. The Gemara further qualifies all these points, and this is all discussed further. New Mishnah, if a woman remarried without waiting 3 months from her previous marriage and gave birth, and they don't know if it's a child from the prior marriage or a premature child from the current one, and she also has other sons from both husbands, the other sons can do Chalitzah, but not Yibum with the questionable son's wife. He does the same to their wives. If the son has brothers from both husbands, but the ones from the other husbands aren't from that mother, and they die, he can do Yibum or Chalitzah with their widows, and if he dies, they can do only Chalitzah. If one husband was a Yisrael and the other was a Kohen, all the stringencies from the last Mishnah also apply here. If both husbands were Kohanim, he would observe the laws of a mourner for them, and them for him. They can't become impure for each other if they die. He does not inherit from them, but they do from him. He is not liable for hitting or cursing them. He can go up to the temple as a part of the Mishmar group of either one, but does not receive a portion of the sacrificial meat unless both husbands were a part of the same Mishmar group. The Gemara discusses these points. There's related discussion. Some say if he hits or curses both fathers, he's liable. Some say if it's done one after the other, which is discussed. It also clarifies the other points, like to establish by the sacrificial meats, it works if the fathers are a part of the same Mishmar group and base Av, and he gets one portion. And that's the end of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Tractate Yevamos starts discussing some of the actual laws of the Chalitzah ceremony. The first Mishnah says, the ceremony of Chalitzah, wherein the Yibum marriage of a widow and her brother-in-law is refused, essentially consists of the reading of several verses from the Torah, the widow removing the brother-in-law's right shoe, and then spitting towards him, which is all brought from verses in the Torah. There's lengthy explanation elsewhere as to why this ceremony is done in such a manner. Anyways, this ceremony must be done before a panel of 3 judges, although they can even be 3 regular people. This ceremony can be done with a minal, a type of soft leather shoe, but not with a sock. It can be done with a sandal, only if it has a sole. It's a valid shoe if it's worn from the knee and down, not from the knee and up. It is a valid chalitzah if the shoe is not the brother-in-law's, or if it's a wooden sandal, or if it's a left shoe on his right foot. He could also use a shoe that's too large if he can walk in it, or a shoe that's too small if it covers most of his foot. The Gemara explains, it says judges, even though they can be laymen, to say that they must be able to dictate the necessary verses that are read, as judges do. Others say you need a panel of 5 men, which is a dispute based on a verse. It's argued further, but we say we do chalitzah before 3 judges, as the opinion that said it must be 5 eventually retracted his opinion, unlike by the judges of Mion, by the refusal of an arranged marriage where there's 2. Based on a verse, the location of the chalitzah must be arranged beforehand. There was also a time when chalitzah was done before 5, but 2 of those weren't judges. Those were there just to publicize the event, and there are related points mentioned. It also says, based on the verse, that a convert can only judge another convert by such laws. It further qualifies which types of shoes are and are not permissible to be used. There are related points. It says if a woman grew up along with the person she eventually does chalitzah with, we're not worried that she ever happened to remove his shoe for whatever reason, thus technically doing chalitzah, and if we saw such a thing occur, there's no worry that that was her intent. There are other points on which types of shoes are and are not permitted, along with sources. It also discusses an instance wherein a heretic tried to compare the Jewish people and God to a woman who did chalitzah, but it was disputed based on the wording, saying that although the Jewish people have done wrong, our bond is still there. Furthermore, it says that a sock is not considered a shoe, which has relevancy by other laws and has variation depending on the type of sock. This is further discussed. It also mentions that while doing chalitzah, your foot must be pressed to the ground, and some say that if your foot is deformed in such a way that you walk on the upper part of your foot, you're not allowed to do chalitzah. The remaining points are discussed along with sources. This goes further along with additional clarification on exactly which types of shoes are usable. New Mishnah, there's debate if chalitzah is valid if done at night, and also debate if it's valid if done on the left foot. The Gemara debates why these opinions argue. It said to be that they argue if this is compared to the beginning or end of a monetary trial, depending on if it can be done at night. It also mentions an instance where a sage did a chalitzah case with a felt shoe by himself and at night, the permissibility of which is disputed. The argument on the permissibility of using your left foot for chalitzah is based on the explanation of a verse. New Mishnah, if the shoe was removed and she spat, but she didn't say the verses, it's a valid chalitzah. If she said the verses and spat but didn't remove the shoe, it's an invalid chalitzah. If she removed the shoe and said the verses but didn't spit, the validity of the chalitzah is debated based on the interpretation of a verse. If either the woman or man are a deaf-mute, or the male is a minor, it's not a valid chalitzah. If a minor girl did chalitzah, which means she's rejecting the marriage, she must redo it later as an adult. If she didn't, her earlier one is invalid. If the chalitzah was done before 2 judges, or 3, and one was found to be disqualified, it's disputed if her chalitzah was invalid. Once there was a widow and brother-in-law in prison, and they did chalitzah by themselves, and it was ruled to be valid. The Gemara says that we said the verses aren't necessary, however the deaf-mute still can't do chalitzah, as they aren't legally considered to be mentally competent. A regular mute also cannot, as they need to be fit to speak. It also says, if the widow spat at one of the brothers, she then needs to do chalitzah, as we're concerned that was her intent. This is debated. This is all discussed further, along with several related points. It also says if the widow spits blood, she then still needs to do chalitzah, as there was definitely spittle included. It's further debated if it's legally accepted if a minor does chalitzah, and it cites a related incident. It says that the oldest a girl can do chalitzah, the rejection of a Levirate marriage, is once she's older, having reached certain stages of physical development. The other points are further discussed. The case of the chalitzah in the prison cell was said to have a witness outside, which was how they knew about this whole thing. It was also said that the entire incident and the ruling of the case took place in the prison. Therefore, there are additional cases discussed, and a few additional qualifications, such as an argument if the judges need to be able to recognize the man and woman doing chalitzah. New Mishnah. In regards to the exact order of chalitzah, it's that they first go to court, and as the verse says, and the elders of the city shall summon him, and they shall speak to him. This means that they're advised, for instance, if there's a large age gap, they're advised to not marry, and that they should do Chalitzah instead. They cite the relevant quotes from the verses. My Yavam refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to take me in Yibum, and the other says, I do not want to marry her, and this is all said in Hebrew. The verse then states, Then his Yevamos shall approach him before the eyes of the elders, and she shall remove his shoe from upon his foot and spit before him. And this means that the spittle should be visible to the judges. Then the verse says, And she shall declare and say, So shall be done to the man who will not build the house of his brother. Although some said that they would read the entire chapter, and that's what the custom was established to be. The verses then finish, and his name shall be called in Israel, the house of the one whose shoe was removed, which is what he's then referred to, although his students don't have to, and others say that everyone there must say that. The Gemara clarifies these points, and further says exactly what they need to say with which words. It also describes the Chalitzah document, and says that the scriptural verses can be written on it. The spittle must be at least level with his face before it blows away. If that occurs, she must spit on her own without chewing stuff beforehand to help. The judges must see the spittle. The remaining points are clarified, and that's the end of chapter 12.